Today, I'm delighted to welcome Rami Tzafrir, Senior Director, Talent Organisation and Learning at HiBob, to the Digital HR Leaders podcast. Rami, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. We've known each other for quite a few years now. Could you start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself, your role at HiBob, and maybe HiBob's progress? So we've had your colleagues Niret, Sarah Reynolds, and Ronnie Zahavi on in previous years, and every time I speak to someone at HiBob, you've made significant progress. So I think it's good for listeners to hear that as well.
Definitely. Thank you, David. First of all, it's a pleasure. You're right. We met, I think, when Inside 222 was still, starting, right? You just founded it. I remember we met up in London, and I've been following you since then. And it's exciting to finally sit down. And you mentioned a couple of names, but I've had other data heroes or mentors that have been on your show. So this is a real pleasure. My name is Rami Tzafrir. I lead the talent organization and learning globally at HiBob. I've been at HiBob for 3 years. Before that, did all sorts of different odd jobs. Wanted to be a veterinarian at first, and ended up doing research, clinical research, and then moving into quickly realizing that wasn't really my future, and moving into HR, doing talent management, leadership development. And 3 years ago, making the move to HiBob, which was a very different industry, very different company from what I've done in the past. But it was the first company that I felt really did HR, right? The purpose, what we did, what we promoted, what we built and created as a product was HR. And that was, the place for me to be. You can hear that I completely drank the Kool-Aid. So I am a true bobber and talk about the village. But HiBob, really exciting days for HiBob. I think we're, across the 1 million employee mark as a footprint. We really are, an HCM platform that helps modern, mid-size plus and multinational companies really put their people first. That's the way I see it. I know there's a lot of sort of corporate type definitions of what it is that we do, but I think we really help people at the end of the day. We help making work more personal, more inclusive, and really live and grow the way that people live today.
Well, we actually use HiBob at Insight 222 as well, so with our team. So and yes, I can certainly validate it. It's a very helpful part of how we deliver to our people. So thanks for that, Rami. Now at HiBob, you've been leading a study around a concept known as covering, which obviously has links with psychological safety, which is a topic we've discussed previously on the podcast. Could you explain to our listeners who don't know what covering is, but also what brought you to study this topic at HiBob?
Definitely. Covering is downplaying or hiding aspects of who you are, like your background, your beliefs, your mental health history, anything possibly that you can think of in your past and how it impacts you today, in order to meet real or perceived expectations at work. The term was originally coined by Kenji Yoshino, an NYU professor, a law professor out of all things. And I think it really gave us a language. I feel it gave us the first time a language to really explain or articulate what some of the phenomena that we were feeling at work, but we couldn't describe it, or at least the frameworks that we had until then were two-dimensional for us to really understand the depth of what inclusivity means. And it's something that interests us. I think one of our key principles at HiBob is that we drink our own Merlot, which is definitely better than eating our own dog food. But it means that we don't only support other companies, we want to understand the human being. And for us, that meant making the transition from performative inclusion, so inclusion where we actually talk about or signal it, to actually feeling safe and showing up and expressing vulnerability. So from a performative to a lived inclusion. And in order to do that, we felt that we needed more tools, right? I think there were all of these signals that were coming up, I think our external and our internal value proposition is almost identical. We are people proud externally and internally as well. That being said, there's certain things that within the company kept nagging at me. For example, there's a survey question, an engagement survey question, where we ask if I feel stressed or experience challenges, I feel comfortable to voice this. And that for me is sort of a zero tolerance question, right? I expect us to be at 100% favorability. We have high marks, but not 100. And that is one of the things that started me thinking as to, what are people telling us? What are they not telling us? Engagement survey questions, we all know, are very important. They show us or tell us a lot about the organization. But I feel they're telling us things that are expressed and not necessarily suppressed behaviors. And that is what covering is trying to get at. So it's not necessarily what's visible in an engagement survey. Someone might feel engaged. Someone might feel engaged and included, but they're still hiding parts of themselves in order to be perceived as more professional. And that is what we try to get at. I think traditional DI metrics don't necessarily do that. They focus on, and we have a set, this is not saying we don't use those, right? We have a set of questions on our engagement survey that focus on DEI. But those, I think, focus or get more at the sentiment, the representation, not really what it means, what the emotional labor is for an employee to feel, when they feel they need to blend in. Can an employee just come up to us and say, I'm struggling? Everything is great. I'm happy with the work-life balance, with my compensation. I enjoy the work that I'm doing, but I'm struggling because of X or Y. And that is really what started us thinking, is there a different framework that we can look into, that we can create, that we can investigate to go in deeper?
And if people are covering in the workplace, then they can feel, as you've alluded to there, Rami, they can feel stress, anxiety, reduces their sense of belonging, have negative impact on their well-being, and then from a employer perspective, potentially has an impact on their performance as well. And obviously,
definitely,
HiBob is a company that's growing very fast. I'm not sure how many employees you're up to now, but I know you're growing very quickly. So it's really important that you, as you said, that you don't just, I like the phrase drink your own Merlot. Actually, I'm going to use that one as well. But it's, as you said, it's very important. You obviously, to your clients, you're talking about the importance of this. So as you said, it's important that you reflect that yourself within the organization, isn't it?
Yeah. No, definitely. But part of us drinking our own Merlot is that we're thought leaders, right? And we feel responsible that anything that we do internally, we don't just recommend someone do something, we actually try it ourselves. That's part of the philosophy. And in order to really understand this concept better, we partnered with UX. UX is a boutique consultancy. It specializes in OD, in leadership. It has world-class programs and advisory services, but they also lead some original research. And we felt they were the perfect partners for us, both because UX is the human experience. They want to improve the human experience. We want to improve the human workforce. So it's an amazing match, and we're both companies are really passionate about this. That's why we found ourselves endless weekends working on this, although this wasn't part of our formal day job. But we really wanted to understand this. We wanted to create a new framework, which we did. And we spent over 2 years working on this study, and it was one of the most eye-opening experiences I've ever had. And you mentioned what the impact is. Some of the data that we saw is validated preconceptions that we have, and some of it was very surprising. So patterns that were validated or expected. Obviously, I think anyone who has ever worked anywhere knows that people sometimes conceal parts of themselves in order to navigate that workplace, right? I think I've learned that in my first fast food interview when I was 14. There's certain things that you need to maybe express or show differently in order to get the job and do well at the job. But what surprised us was the intensity and the emotional weight that carries. So 97%, this is a study that we ran in the US with over 2,000 participants, 97% of respondents say that they cover at least some of the time, and 67 that they do so often or always. Often or always, more than 2/3. So that really tells us that it's not a niche issue, right? It's really something that's structural, it's widespread. I call it an epidemic. So that was sort of obvious, and we know with hindsight bias, some people say, well, of course, but the magnitude of it surprised us. And on the other hand, there were findings that were really surprising as far as the content itself, not just the magnitude. We built a framework. It has, the framework has sort of this concentric. It has 5 layers. And it doesn't just look at the demographics, but it looks at roles and responsibilities. It looks at your values and beliefs. It looks at your personality factors. It looks at the core of it. It looks at your well-being, your both physical and emotional well-being. So things that some of them are very easy to observe, and some of them are really core and central to your experience as an employee. And we think that sort of 5-layered framework really gives you the depth to understand inclusivity. And that's where we started seeing the interesting data. That we checked over 40 factors that people might be covering. And I think if you go back to how this entire work originated, I think we all have our demons, or we all have the things that we feel like we need to cover or had covered in the past. But this study really showed us that there's so many different factors that you would not even expect people to need to cover. People who, they're caregivers, or people who suffer from IBS, or people who, the smallest and unimaginable factors that you might not consider as a work issue, people carry and cover with them. So we saw that people mostly cover for the same reasons. It might be different things, but they cover for the same reasons. They cover, in order to maintain a professional image. They think they want to avoid discrimination or seek social acceptance. So again, I say think because some of this might be perceived and some of this might be actual. I don't know all the workplaces that exist out there. But the cost, as you had mentioned, David, is really tangible. It's stress levels, lower performance, lower innovation, lower engagement. 43% of respondents said that they feel they would be further ahead in their careers if they did not need to cover. So the cost is immense.
Well, we're going to dig into a lot of this in a bit more detail, Rami, and thank you for sharing some of those headline findings and also details about the study as well. It's really helpful. We're recording this episode on the 20th of May. I know the report is due to be published in June. Hopefully, it will be published by the time this episode comes out. If it is, we will provide a link in the show notes as well. But obviously, I'm coming at this fresh as well. So I was just listening to you there, Rami, and I've got quite a few sort of follow-up questions, really. So maybe let's get into some of the specific. Were there any sort of specific trends across demographics, seniority levels, or job types that stood out in the data?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The report will come out. The report is at the moment, if it doesn't grow between now and June, is 30-page long. So definitely we won't cover all of the insights there. But I think one of the most interesting thing is that we say covering doesn't discriminate. Right? We've seen it across the board. So it impacts almost all employees. But it shows up very differently. So based on your identity, based on your power, based on the context in which you're operating, it will show up differently. So for example, we looked at, one of the things we looked at was generations, or your seniority within an organization. It impacts across the spectrum. But for example, younger employees, or Gen Z specifically, reported higher level of covering of certain things such as mental health, self-care, socioeconomic level and background, and for various purposes, right? I think some of these are assumptions, right? This is where we're getting into hypothesis that I feel like it's our take on it. but we were not seeing the real causality there. But across the board, I mean, even one of the things that really surprised me was C-suite leaders, so C-team leaders that reported surprisingly very high levels of covering. Now, when I was studying OD, one of the key concepts, if you probably, David, you know this as well, is, positional power equals personal freedom. We're not seeing it here, right? If you're at the C-suite level and you still feel like you need to invest a lot of your energy in covering, what does that mean? Now, given they cover different things, right? They cover, health issues, burnout, ideological views, but that was very interesting. We saw diverse covering or different types of covering depending on your industry, your organizational culture. Some of this expected. So obviously, if you're a very high competitive, dog eat dog type of culture, you're going to be covering more. Versus if you're a family, formal, small or governmental type of organization. What surprised us that actually companies that describe themselves as creative and innovative show higher level of covering, which is a contradiction, right? Because we expect actually those cultures or those ambiances to not have covering in order for them to be more creative and innovative. Hierarchy it was also a very strong one. So the more hierarchy, I feel, amplifies the need to self-edit. So who do you cover from, right? We see that there's, direct managers and senior leaders. People cover less from HR, but still it's almost 30%. So that question is, what is HR's role and how do we support people if they feel they need to cover in front of us? We saw that there's different covering across hybrid workers. So whether you're 1 day or 5 days in the office, we see different covering profile. I can go in deeper into some of these, but I'm just mentioning at the high level. Obviously, gender differences. So both men and women cover, but they cover for different, cover different types of aspects of criteria that we looked at. Women cover more emotional health and personal lives. Men cover more ideological beliefs and professional histories.
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, it's interesting. You mentioned the socio-economic one. So I'm in, obviously, as people can tell by my accent, I'm in the UK. And I learned quite early in my career that you were judged by the way you speak. And I'm from a town where people don't speak the Queen's English, shall we say. So I had to, my form of covering was to change the way I spoke. So, and I'm sure this will resonate with a number of UK listeners as well, whether it's a regional accent or, whether you're from the south of England and, you drop the odd vowel, it's judged upon. So people probably cover their socioeconomic background. I can see that. And you said this, that the survey was done in the US, and I think it's similar there, I guess, as well. And I guess what this means is covering means you're not really being your true self in the workplace, doesn't it? So, which isn't good. I mean, on some of the demographics that you mentioned, Rami, what's your view, or what does the data tell you, or why some demographics are more prone to covering than others?
Yeah. So you mentioned that we did this in the US, and one of the insights that I didn't mention, which was extremely interesting to me, is we actually looked at political ideologies. We had from very conservative to very liberal, and one of the things that surprised me, at least, is that very liberal employees, contrary to what seemed to be common sense, actually showed the highest rates of covering. And there might be definitely now with the U.S. and politics, there might be reasons for that. But oftentimes, I think that was not because of any sort of internal work repercussions or anything that was structured within the workplace, but with the need to cover from peers, for example. So the context is extremely important. I think some of the interesting things we saw, because it's universal, right? It's universal. So I think that the main reason or the main differences that we're seeing is what pressures or what different types of pressure different groups have. And that's where the conversation should start. I think the data doesn't provide the answers. It just it highlights what you should be looking at. So obviously younger employees want to gain credibility, and in different contexts, in different places, that may mean different things. But you were talking about the accent. I mean, imagine me, born in Brazil, lived in 15 different countries. I don't have any sort of English accent, and I don't have a name that sounds or resembles anything that might be common in a US company. How do I get along? So as a young employee, that was completely different to me. And I remember even people suggesting that I change my name in order to do better in my career, which I didn't. But young employees want to gain credibility. Senior leaders want to maintain their authority, but they have a lot more visibility. So what does that mean for them? I think we saw, for example, bisexual employees, because they have this multiple dimensions that they need to navigate, show the highest covering rates of every subgroup that we looked into. I think high pressure industries, again, they discourage vulnerability, right? You have to be always on. There's no room for slowing down. There's no room for mistakes, and so forth. So I think the main question is, because we can't give the answers to all every single imaginable scenario, is understanding that it's universal, and think of what the pressures are for that specific role in that specific organization. And that will help you understand why. A lot of what I found surprising, and I think it's a very important insight, is that covering doesn't only happen because of fear of exclusion or what's happening around you and in your climate. Sometimes it's internalized pressure, right? It's the pressure to conform to what your expectations are of yourself and your role. And I think I won't go into I know this is not going to be an inclusivity podcast, but there's different terms that, there's masking and covering. Those are very different things. The covering, I think, is really sublimating, or really trying to really internally also cover certain things that are not just external. So I hope that's answered your question, David. Look at what might be causing, or the perception of pressure, and try and understand what's behind it.
And we'll get to how HR professionals and managers can maybe deal with this as well, and try and help people not have to cover as well. We'll get to that a bit later. But let's think about let's have a couple of questions about the impact. You touched on how people felt that it had affected their progression, which is quite interesting. I think you said it was 43%, which is quite significant. So how does covering, what does the research say? How does covering affect an employee's performance, engagement, or ability to progress in their career?
And I think that's where this is extremely interesting for companies, right? And not just for individuals, because the cost of covering impacts a lot more than emotions. As you said, it impacts the performance, your ability to connect, your ability to grow, which is maybe the most critical skill nowadays. 85% of respondents said that they report stress. And I think that stress is from the emotional labor. So how much energy goes into self-monitoring? How much energy goes into image management? It drains completely creative and cognitive energy, and really reduces innovation and productivity. We've seen that across the board. So every single population that we looked at, from an engagement perspective, I think this is one of the most interesting things. People, employees who feel like they need to cover from their direct manager show a 38-point lower NPS.
Wow.
Which is mind-boggling. The impact of just the need, not even covering, but cover from your direct manager, how that impacts your work environment. I think we're doing a lot of work on succession planning now and talent reviews. Covering impacts that as well. So people who field they need to cover will most likely not go for positions that have more visibility. So it obviously impacts your talent pipeline. And one of the findings that I found most depressing, to be honest, is that covering doesn't only impact you at work, it goes beyond that. So people who showed high stress of covering related stress at work also showed it beyond work.
So obviously, covering has a significant impact not just on the individual, but on the potentially on the organisation as well. As you said, it affects your talent pipelines, and as you said, from an individual perspective, impacts them potentially on the outside of the organisation as well. So this is something that we really need to look at. So let's look at something related to psychological safety. Then we'll start looking at what action that companies can take. So, would you say that covering raises the question on the level of psychological safety within an organization? Or given the study was done in the US, do you think it's more of a wider geopolitical issue? Or would you expect to see similar things in other countries? Which I personally would, but it's been interesting to hear your thought on that, Rami.
Yeah, great question. We asked ourselves that as well, right? I think how much of this is maybe geopolitical, how much is really sort of human. I think it's definitely psychological safety, regardless of where the study is happening. That being said, I think safety is shaped also by what people carry with them, what they bring with them into the workplace from the outside world. I said earlier what they bring from the outside world internally also, so their perception, their value scale, and so forth. So I don't think it's an either or. I think it's both internal and external forces at play here. I think there's certain climates or regions where it might be more difficult, more risky. There might be more noise, but it's definitely a combination. And I think you can see that because even in US-based companies that we've looked at, it's not evenly felt, right, across the organization. So there are people who cover more in certain teams with certain managers based on their identity. We've been through 2 acquisitions lately. I don't think it's not just a geographical, and it's not just a company culture. It's a combination. Covering definitely increases with outside tensions. I know that there's all of these events that have happened during the last 2 years. More even if we go back, not even not even thinking of COVID, but thinking of Ukraine and other places that have triggered and impacted us. I think the external world impacts us. I think it's up to our managers and leaders. I mean, we can't control the external world, but we can at least try and build a culture where we respond with trust and not with fear. That's one of the key insights that we have. So inclusion needs to be lived, right? It's not just stated. It's not posters. What's within your remit of control, impact it in a way that builds trust.
And it sounds like, Rami, that as a manager or an HR professional, which we'll get on to in a minute, but immediately listening to you there, it sounds like we need to be aware of the internal and external factors that are going on in and outside an organisation at any time. So internal factors, as you said, could be a merger and acquisition, could be there could be a reduction in force going on, or economic challenges that the organisation's facing, and maybe that has an impact on covering. I'm just coming up with some hypotheses, so you can comment on them. And then obviously we think about external factors, so whether that's geopolitical within a country or actually externally as well. And let's be honest, there's not been a shortage of those topics going on in this decade. From global pandemic to wars to all sorts of geopolitical upheaval. And I guess as managers and HR professionals, we need to think, I suppose we're thinking about how that impacts us, but we also need to think about how that potentially impacts the organisation and certain people within the organisation, I guess, as well, which is quite complex and quite challenging.
Definitely. I think the trying to maybe I'll take a step back. Before I moved to Bob, I worked for a corporate, a huge corporate, had nearly 90,000 employees. I thought moving to a smaller company was going to simplify things. It did not. I think at the end of the day, we're a group of unique individuals, whether it's 20 people or 200,000. I think the complexity is still there. And that's why I like our framework, because it doesn't limit it just to demographics or something that's very menial. I think the only way we can tackle this at an employee level is by listening, and that's what part of one of the great findings of this survey is that the survey itself, so our research tool, was an intervention. What we saw was that people who had actually completed the survey, their attitude towards covering, their understanding of it, their optimism about it was highly increased. So I think the first thing to say is start by listening, because covering is often invisible until you create space for it, for people to have that awareness. So it doesn't necessarily mean run our survey. You could do any sort of reflective team exercise, any sort of we had storytelling sessions run, which were with our leaders, which was amazing. And any of that type of dynamic work can create the space for you to be aware of the covering and try and reduce it. Managers, obviously, as you mentioned, are key in a very ironic way, because they're key because they're the main audience, right? Most people cover from their managers, but they're also the pressure point. They're the reason why people cover. So I think they can also be, one of the most impactful solutions for us. And we're doing a lot of the work that we're doing is with managers. How are they showing up? How are they incentivizing covering? What tools do they need? Hopefully, one of the things that we'll have later on, one of the first deliverables that we want after we post a report, is a manager checklist. What can managers do in order to help reduce covering and tackle this?
And if we look at HR, obviously you're an HR professional, Rami, and obviously HiBob is empowering HR professionals in its customers as well. What does this mean for HR? What can HR professionals listening to this episode do to support a more transparent culture and minimize covering in the workplace? It sounds like the first thing to do is listen and actually start talking about it.
Yeah. I think this is huge. I think one of the things that made me laugh when I told you we were looking at this 40 different factors that people cover from. We saw that we were talking about the workplace itself. We saw that about 30% of people cover that they feel they do not have enough work. And 30% of the people cover that they work too much. I'm like, there's all of this spent energy on people trying to, find the alignment exactly of what the organization is expecting from you, instead of just saying, look, there might be periods where I'm busier and there might be periods where I work less, but we're all invested and we're all in this. So there's a lot of energy that goes into unnecessary, expenditure. I think we should look at this. HR should help the organization look at this from a strategic, not from an empathy perspective. Empathy is extremely important, but look at this from a strategic perspective. If I were to mention anything else that impacts performance, you would immediately want to tackle it, right? But when we say it's covering, people say, "Oh, this is sort of a soft thing. Why should we look at this?" No, this is impacting performance. So I think we should look at this from a leadership perspective, from a culture perspective. It should be a design challenge, right? Let's look at our environment. Let's look at our systems, and what can we do in order to reduce this self-editing? What can we do to reduce covering? And that's why I think inclusion is not a value. I think it's a capability. It's a skill set. We should look at it. How can we practice it on a day-to-day basis so we can, that energy that we spend on covering can actually go into innovation, can go into performance, can go into creativity. And therefore, this concept is not siloed in DEI. Sometimes I get annoyed, pardon my passion, when people think it's just a DEI issue. No, I think it's a real performance and organizational performance issue.
Yes, because as you said, everyone all types, seniorities, demographics, all experience covering. As you said, it doesn't discriminate against people. You could be the CEO perhaps, and you can experience covering, or so yeah. It's, as you said, it's not a diversity issue. It's a culture issue. It's a performance issue that we need to address.
David, I don't know whether this is possible in the podcast, or maybe I ask people just to pause the recording now for a minute, but really take a minute and think, what is it that I'm covering? That would be interesting. Part of what we're getting from the survey is we get the snippets of people sending us short, anonymous testimonials, which is beautiful. One of the things they want to have on our website is all of these sort of micro stories, or these instances where people are sharing with us things that they've covered and how they feel about it.
Now, that's a good idea. I mean, silence is always an awkward thing in anything, particularly in a podcast. So what I might recommend to people to do is press pause, and just for a minute, as Rami said, just think about the things that you personally might be covering in the workplace, or if you're a manager, think about maybe some of the things that your team might be covering in the workplace, and then come back in a minute and we'll continue the conversation. So no, that was a good idea, Rami. And now that people are back, those that have actually paused, hopefully you've learned something, and maybe you've thought about stuff that you're covering that you maybe weren't even aware of. It sounds like when people actually think about it, Rami, then it brings up issues that maybe are in the subconscious a little bit of how people show up.
Hopefully, and again, the goal is not zero covering, right? We're realistic, and we know that I think we'll never get to live in a place where there's zero covering, but at least have we created a culture where people are not penalized for certain things, and we're more human. That's the goal.
So moving on, obviously we can't talk about anything at the moment without talking about AI. It's definitely a topic that is high on the agenda. I'm sure it is. I know it is for you at HiBob as well, particularly working in HR. How do you see AI playing a role? Either maybe as a potential solution or something that supports covering, or maybe as a risk when it comes to addressing covering and supporting greater authenticity in the workplace.
Yeah. First of all, we are doing a lot of work on AI. I think AI personally is something that's been interesting me for many years. Still, when it was not AI, when it's referred to still as machine learning and so forth. But I think AI is also a trigger for a lot of covering. That's at least what I'm saying. I think a lot of the resistance to AI and change with AI comes from people needing to cover is because of that. Am I using it? Am I not using it? Am I using it appropriately? So that in itself, I realize, is also a trigger for covering, but I think it can also be a solution. AI at the end of the day is what we do with it, right? I think AI is an amplifier. It can be used for good or for bad. Right? It can reinforce covering, or it can help reduce it, and we are responsible. I mean HR and leaders, on how it's designed and how it's used. It can be a real risk, because it can really all the biases that we have can be amplified if the data that we use is not the right data. Right? So if we're only focusing on performance and the time it took you to do something, then are we reinforcing overworking? Are we reinforcing conformity? Are we reinforcing doing things just the way that they were done before, which is the complete opposite of covering? So I think we need to use it intentionally in order to reduce covering. Our focus, at least as a company, is how do we use it to personalize? How do we use it to make sure that we're not using a template, or we're not using a one solution fits all, because we know that is what causes covering, right? When you think you need to behave like other people, when your deliverables need to be exactly like other deliverables, when even there's an office barbecue, even it's not during work, but you need to behave like your peers. So I think the personalization aspect, and that's where we're focusing a lot of our work on AI, is at solving that and giving you the best solution, for you. We have an AI mind, we call it program, which is, it's not just what AI can do, but it's what is the mindset that it's reinforcing. I think there's no way around it, right? I think people talk about a burning platform. I think there's no platform. Platform is gone. We're in the water. So we need to realize how we use AI for the path of good.
Yeah, and actually, you raised a really important point about AI being perhaps a trigger for covering. So, as you said, I'm using AI and it's helping me get my work done and it's giving me some time back, and I don't necessarily want to admit to that because maybe that won't go down well, or I'm working so hard I haven't got time to upskill myself on AI, and I'm fearing I'm going to get left behind. But I don't want to tell people that I'm not using AI, because if I'm not using AI, I might be at risk. So there's all sorts of things that could potentially be going on there, I think. So yeah, and I think this leads quite nicely to the question of the series, Rami, which is a question we're asking everyone in this series of the Digital HR Leaders podcast. How can HR, so we're thinking wider now, obviously, than covering, how can HR use AI to improve employee experience and well-being?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I think we don't have the answers yet, right? I think we're part of the Feed Forward collective, this group of Ethan Mollick and a couple of other AI thought leaders, and our CEO's Roni Zavi's slogan is "Do more with more." My take on it is do more of what's interesting, or do more of what's unique to you, or do more of what you enjoy doing. So I think part of our role is really to see how AI can enhance the human, right? There's certain things that no matter what, only you can do. We have sort of three tracks that we're working on with our executive leadership, right? One is how can you be more human with the help of AI, and not the opposite? How the human AI collaboration, and the third is how do you reimagine work so that AI can create more space for purpose? So not how you can be more, how can your output be higher, but if you get that additional, whatever the unit is that you're measuring, time, productivity, and so forth, how do you use it for something that's meaningful to you, and not just do more of the same? And HR, I think, is the conduit for it, right? I think even in some of the studies or explorations that we did, even with tech teams that you're expecting there would be the highest intake of this technology, you're seeing resistance. I think AI can help, and HR and AI can help enhance that employee experience. I think a lot of it through personalization. So how do we listen to employees? How do we listen to them earlier and better? Covering can be seen, so the signals of covering can be. I think we can find out what those red flags are to help us know that a certain employee is covering. And it's just promoting that, more thoughtful check-ins, supporting our managers. A lot of our focus is and how do we support the managers? And we've all been there, right? You have 7 direct reports. How can you really be focused on your day job and supporting those 7 unique individuals? And not even AI. I think Gen AI can help us close that, strengthen those feedback loops and so forth.
No, really good. I wrote down those 3 tracks because I thought they were really good. And actually listening to what you said as well, I think it's important, as I'm sure some of the people listening, or hopefully many of the people listening, a real opportunity for HR, this to lead the transformation of the organisation on AI. If we think about it, there's an argument that we're in an industrial revolution. And arguably the biggest industrial revolution that we've had so far. And there's a huge, reskilling. It's a big thing, and HR needs to be at the center of helping, employees reskill. I love what you said there about personalization as well. That should be a benefit of AI, as you said, that you're a manager, as you said, managing 7 people, they're all unique. If AI can give you insight on how to manage each of those people more effectively, and then the team as a whole more effectively, then that can only be a good thing. But as you said, it's still pretty early days yet, I think, and there's going to be a lot of change in the coming years. So, Rami, I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think a lot of people will really, be interested in hearing more about covering, which may be a concept, some listeners will be aware of, but many, I suspect, aren't. So thank you so much for being a guest on the Digital HR Leaders podcast. As I said, we will, when the report is hopefully live, when this podcast goes live, we will put a link to the report so people can access it in the show notes as well. But other than that, Rami, can you let listeners know how they can find you on social media, find out more about the work you and your team are doing at HiBob, and of course, find out more about HiBob itself?
Definitely. So first of all, on LinkedIn, we thrive on collaboration. Right? We have a very strong and vibrant community, but you don't. Unlike Inside 222, you don't need to be a customer of HiBob in order to reach out and start the conversation. So I would say download the report, reach out to me on LinkedIn or our company, HiBob. Hopefully later on we'll be able to have you run the survey or find an equivalent survey that you can run internally. But definitely we would love to start a conversation on covering or any of the other topics that relate to either learning, leadership, or talent management, which is what I'm passionate about, and help us improve the workforce for everyone.
Well, Rami, it's been a pleasure speaking to you, and and having been fortunate enough to speak at one of the HiBob customer events where you did have non-customers as well, hardcore. I can certainly, provide a lot of credit to the community that you're creating and the change movement that you're creating at HiBob in the industry. So thanks very much for being a guest on the show.
Thank you, David.
In this series, we will be speaking to a range of senior leaders who are pushing a data-driven and digital HR agenda. Make sure that you subscribe via your podcast app of choice and also via our YouTube channel for free and regular interviews with the digital HR leaders of the future.